Thank you, Marcelo. It's a pleasure being here. I'm going to give a Latin American perspective, a very critical one on the new rights debate. So the academic challenges that we have posed, for example, Professor Bublitz to us against new rights is a necessary critique that disputes the hype around new rights, and especially in Latin America, which is a region that's been known as pioneer in this debate. So one of the first conclusions we have is we don't oppose regulation when we talk about new rights or when we critique the new rights initiative. We oppose bad regulations. And we know the context, so we can take some step backwards. This debate starts with the proposal of Marcelo Yenca and Roberto Ndorno in 2017, but especially in the political discussion forum in Latin America, it starts with the 5 new rights of the New Rights Initiative. Now, the New Rights Foundation, led by Rafael Juste in the Columbia University, and also in Latin America, he has a strategic help by some NGOs like the Caminal Foundation and some politicians and lawyers that help the political structure to work. So, you know, the 5 new rights, especially free will, mental privacy, identity, equitable access to mental augmentation, and protection against bias. But I'm going to divide this presentation in 6 arguments against new rights: conceptual problems, ethical problems, financial problems, problems of necessity, inflation, devaluation, narratives, why they don't really protect us. They are regressive in terms of human rights. They are not progressive. And some examples of bad regulation. I hope this last part is going to be fun. So some basic conceptual problems in the new rights initiatives, for example, the problem of free will. So free will is a 2 millennia debate, and that is a problem when you try to translate this philosophical debate that doesn't have any solution into legal realms and into a legal new right as a concept. So what the New Rights Foundation, for example, advocates for is not really free will understood in a philosophical sense of alternative possibilities or ultimate control, but rather of informed consent. Is basically to protect against manipulation without your consent. So this already exists with a concept of informed consent, rights of freedom, and not under a very problematic new right or concept of free will that's being actually currently discussed. And for example, for Morse, is a dialectical big problem that doesn't have any solution in the forthcoming years. Other problems regarding how we can define legally other philosophical terms, such as cognitive liberty, for example, or how we can define exactly what a change or unacceptable change in personal identity really means. When we try to translate those philosophical debates into new rights, that might be a new problem. So conceptual inconveniences, other ethical problems regarding, for example, and especially the near right to equal access to mental augmentation, which is especially problematic for ethical reasons. Well, the diagnosis of the New Rights Foundation is correct in the sense that, well, we should avoid unequal access to enhancement near technologies. But the solution is quite problematic. So first, that there's an important ethical debate behind this right. So do we really have a settled debate whether we should allow completely the changing of human nature, whatever that means, with enhancement or even transhumanist applications of technology? Is that really a settled debate whether we should move forward and beyond human nature, biological nature? For example, we had 30 years ago an interesting debate regarding genetic modification. And the conclusion was to prohibit genetic modifications without therapeutic or clinical purposes. But this new right to equal access to mental augmentation involves non-therapeutic, nor clinical, nor public health applications of these technologies. So also, if you create a new human right that we all should enhance, but that equally creates a pressure for those people that value human nature now are going to be forced to enhance themselves. Because if they don't, they're going to be discriminated for a new social norm, which is created by a new right to enhancement. There's also a financial problem. If you create in your constitution a new right that says that you're going to guarantee equal access, well, the special next consequence of that is how you are going to finance the new right created with problematic implications. So that would actually mean that we would be financing with public resources, with taxpayers' money, technologies that do not have purposes of public health, therapeutic, or clinical applications, but rather commercial uses and enhancement purposes. So do we really want to finance a right to cognitive enhancement with taxpayers' money? Because that's what in the empirical reality would mean a new right, a new positive right to equal access to mental augmentation. Someone has to guarantee it. So this leads to an interesting contradiction. New rights are supposed to protect us from companies and big tech. But if you create a new right to equal access to mental augmentation, this basically leaves open the door to favor big enterprises' interest, because you would be financing an undetermined amount of technologies with public resources that, again, do not have therapeutic or clinical applications. Another interesting discussion is whether we really do need new rights, especially new problematic rights, because national constitutions and international conventions already protect consent, freedom of thought, privacy, information, physical and mental integrity, moral integrity, equality, justice, and non-discrimination. Do we really need to expand new list of rights, especially problematic rights in conceptual and ethical and financial and practical implications? Perhaps not. Professor Bublitz here has said in some interesting papers that what we have built in human rights discourse and international public law, it has actually taken a lot of decades and years of really careful consideration. Human rights are not meaningless and are historically explained by important landscapes. So if we expand unlimited list of rights, for example, some initiatives in Latin America have created between 5 to 10, even 13 new list of rights regarding neuroprotections. So we might end up weakening and diluting the layer protection that currently has the human rights that we already have. And also, it's very interesting in this recent paper, he actually said that it would be very unfortunate if international organizations were to believe the narrative of the insufficiency of human rights. So this is a dangerous narrative. The dangerous narrative posed by many of the human rights initiatives is basically to say publicly that all that we have built in international public law and international law of human rights is meaningless. It doesn't work. So that the solution is to create new human rights. And that's a very dangerous narrative to hold on. So do they really protect us, especially from the state? And in this initial paper from Professor Yenka and Roberto Andorno, well, they say something we already know and discussed yesterday, for example, and that's the relative value of human rights. And neuro rights don't escape that relative value. For example, Professor Yenka and Andorno suggests that privacy rights, and they are not relative, and that or we already know it. But what happens if we create new rights for mental privacy or cognitive liberty, and they don't protect us, for example, against the state interests, the prosecutor's offices, and that they might be relative against, for example, public safety or national security? Do we really need new rights that are relative and that they are not going to protect us really from new technology? Also, for example, considering the non-invasive nature and the painless nature of brain scans, they suggest that some people might have interesting opinions regarding whether we should use it with or without the consent of persons. So like mental privacy, other interesting rights like mental integrity might not be absolute. And the big question is, well, are relative rights really going to protect us, especially from the powerful state power of justice criminal systems? And I think the answer is not, because we already have some interesting legal concepts such as human dignity that in a question I did yesterday. In Latin America, human dignity is very important in legal practice. It has been interpreted in a Kantian imperative absolute sense. So although it's really a broad concept, we in legal practice use it very much to, for example, against state power, against, for example, inhuman incarceration conditions. We do really use in Colombia an absolute notion of human dignity. Our concepts of like freedom of thought, autonomy, informed consent already might actually be more protective than new relative rights. So in this paper, for example, we say that we don't ignore that human rights are relative. They are relative, and that's something natural to it. Well, most of them. On the contrary, we intend in this paper to bring the discussion more to the inseparable value and absolute value that, for example, our courts in Colombia and Latin America have interpreted of an absolute value of human dignity. So that would limit, for example, the state power regarding lie detection without consent, neuroprediction used against the liberty of a person, or even the more invasive futuristic things like moral enhancement or neurocorrections or neurointerventions. Well, concepts such as freedom of thought, autonomy, body integrity, or human dignity in Latin America will protect us and can be protect us if they are accurately interpreted by our courts as absolute protection against these powers of the state. So if you see this, it's supposed to cause eye pain. So this is the Latin American mess. We have many initiatives, for example, in Chile, the constitutional reform, Mexico, two different reforms, Brazil, one that's not approved at the federal level, another in the state of Rio Grande do Sur, Chile with a law that's not been approved, Argentina with 3 bills not approved, Brazil with another bill not approved, Colombia with 2 bills not approved, Mexico with another bill that's not approved, the Latin American Parliament with 13 new rights that were approved, and the OAS with 2 declarations and the Mexico Charter of Sub-Law approaches. So this is an example of general initiative. We have 15 initiatives in 6 countries, which just 4 of 15 were approved. And the second problem is in Latin America, no one knows what they're doing. An example of that is this, the model law of the Latin American Parliament. For example, they confuse in A, mental privacy with raw brain data. They confuse mental states with raw brain data. They then, for example, say that identity is equal to personal autonomy, which is not. Then they say about free will, autodetermination, autonomy. They don't differ this concept. In F, for example, they prohibit medical intervention in absence of consciousness and written consent. So you have a car crashing in Geneva and you got getting conscious to the ER. Under this law, you're not going to be, medical personnel cannot offer you health care because you're not conscious. So this prohibits it, and it even says, even in medical circumstances. And the final right, for example, proposes a prohibition against hypnosis and suggestion. And one can question, what does hypnosis and suggestion have to do with the new rights debate? But more worrisome, for example, the footnotes in this model law are Wikipedia, and even, for example, they just copy and paste blog links, and the last of them, it says other barriers. What happens if in a dissertation, Abel, you put in use references system other barriers? Well, that might be problematic, right? So I put this law in Turnitin, and it has a 69% of similarity between internet blogs, YouTube conferences, conferences for just Wikipedia. There isn't a single research paper that bases the fundamentals of this law. And another example is the Mexico's new bill. This is also purposely made to hurt your eyes. This new law of bill proposed in Mexico creates 10 new rights, reforms 35 legal bills, including, for example, the organized crime bill. It creates 4 new felonies and crimes, including, for example, the crime of suppression or implantation of memory. Do we currently really need, Professor Gilbert, do we really need 35 legal reforms, for example, to the National Guard law for near-tech purposes, or creating 10 new rights, or creating 4 new crimes, including a crime that you're being implanted with a memory? It's complicated. So regarding, for example, AI ethics, of the 15 projects, 14 of them doesn't have any references to AI systems. Just the Bill of Mexico, it has 35 legal reforms, creates in the chapter 3 some references to AI ethics. For example, transparency, integrity, non-discrimination, reliability, responsiveness, respect of our privacy, identity, personal autonomy, security, informed consent, required bias correction, and they create a new commission called the Commission on New Rights and New Ethics, for example. So some conclusions in April, in the INS debate. After the debate, we had a debate on new rights with Abel, with Sos, and Laura Cabrera. We made this survey. And at the end of the debate, just 2% said that definitely we need new rights. 11% said probably yes, but 25 said that we're not sure if we need new rights. 51 probably not, and 11 definitely not. And I hope you also agree with this conclusion. So here you can find 2 QR codes, one with our research and other. We have created recently the Ibero-American Research Network on Neurolaw and Neuroethics, which is the biggest effort in Latin America and Spain to have a unique and strong voice regarding neuroethical debates and legal emphasis. So 5 conclusions. First, Latin America needs to have an informed, globally situated debate we are not having. We have a lot of politicians wanting to create new initiatives so they can say they were the first ones to save us from the dystopian future of unregulated new technologies. And that's a false dilemma. There is currently a false dilemma within either we create new list of problematic rights or we're going to face a dystopian future of near tech controlling us and implanting memories and neuro weapons. So between neuro rights and the dystopian future, there are a lot of alternative possibilities. We have discussed all these days. We also need consistent, regular regulations in our region. We're having a very fragmented landscape of different regulations, which have rights approaches, legal approaches, sub-law approaches. Some create 5, then 10, then 13 new rights, and some even reform 35 laws, and also interesting, more laws. We need more discussions. We're not having plural discussions regarding societal, political, and academic spaces. And we also need to understand better AI ethics and the relationship with AI ethics and neurotechnology. And my conclusion is we don't need neuro rights. So let's think beyond neuro rights. Thank you.